Hi, I'm Trace Haythorne, Executive Director with ACPE. I'm joining you today far away from my home in Pensacola, Florida. So it is great to be able to gather today with Teresa Jefferson-Snorton, the immediate past Executive Director for ACPE and Bishop in the CME Church, and Bill Scrivener, who has recently retired from his work at Cincinnati Children's Hospital as an educator there for many years. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you
We'd
for the
love to talk a
invitation.
little bit about some of these efforts that we've made in the past and where we are today. So we've tried to bring ACPE and APC together at a couple of attempts in the past. What brought the people together then, and why didn't we succeed? Teresa, can you share some of your thoughts?
Well, actually, I was trying to remember when was it that we tried to get together. I recall I must not have been involved in Nashville. I don't remember. What year was that, Bill?
I'm trying to remember. I was chair certification, so it would have been between 2000 and 2002. You may have just, because I can still remember. Anyway, I'm pretty sure it was Nashville that the board met and seemed to be all set to do this and then didn't.
Well, I probably remember it, but don't remember it. But I do remember kind of what happened subsequently. And that was really a series of meetings that also brought in NAJC, the National Association of Jewish Chaplains, and NACC, National Association of Catholic Chaplains, and AAPC, the American Association of Pastoral Counselors, which eventually led us to create the Spiritual Care Collaborative. And within those conversations of the Spiritual Care Collaborative, ACPE and APC did have several side conversations and even hosted a conference together. And I remember that very, very intensely. I believe that would have been around.
It was Orlando.
2007, 2008. Yeah, something like that. And I remember when it was announced that we were doing that there was really kind of two distinct reactions, which I think we're seeing again now. And that was the group that was like, well, it's about time. And the other group like, how in the world is that going to work? More skeptical crowd. So I think every time, at least in my memory, that we talked about the subject of coming together, people generally fall into one or two camps. And until some common ground is created to bridge those two camps, I think the conversation could continue indefinitely. But one of the things that's certain is the landscape has changed tremendously since that time. And I think many of those changes may have made it easier for the conversation to move further along than it did in the past.
Bill, what's your memory of some of these?
Well, my first memory is that it was not a national conference meeting, it was the off meeting. And I think we were in Nashville and I was there for certification. So I was not directly involved, but certainly there was all the buzz that we understood that the board was meeting. And at least up to a certain point, it seemed like it was going to be a done deal. That was the scuttlebutt. Like I was not sitting in on board meetings or anything, but the outcome was the board voted no. And so I began to ask some of the board members that I knew well, what was that about? The main thing that I remember them saying was it was about the money. That, to put it bluntly, we had more than they did, and there was some anxiety about who was going to get what and all of that sort of parochial concern. I do know that there was a more kind of cultural concern about losing the sense of community that we have when we gather at our own national meetings. What's it going to be like if every year we're meeting with this much larger group, and what will happen to that sense of intimacy and community? And so people were anxious about that as well. So I wasn't privy to the actual conversation, but that seems to have been the main thing. I do remember I was involved, maybe the Spiritual Care Collaborative came about just as I was coming into being president-elect or something, because I remember very well with you, Teresa, attending those meetings, which seemed to be very promising. Certainly a lot of good conversations. And then, I went off my term before that ended, but I do remember that we did do the one conference, and I do remember that there was some larger frustration in the big group around trying to find some activity or cause to really bring us together in a meaningful and ongoing way, that we couldn't really, other than doing a conference, couldn't seem to find a rationale that was compelling enough to cause us to want to continue. Does that sound right to you, Teresa?
Yeah, that does. And I think that some of the dialogue around that had to do with what is ACPE's mission and purpose. And we saw that as being beyond just training chaplains, and felt that, merging with a group that was exclusively devoted to chaplaincy might somehow dilute our mission, which is so much broader in terms of preparation for ministry. I remember that being a real significant concern on the part of particularly a lot of our educators
I think
at
that's
that
right.
point. And so with that, it's kind of like, well, there's a bridge, but it's a tiny little bridge, and is it worth it for us to merge? And of course, one of the things I think that really kind of buries the potential is when you get tied up too quickly in the minutia. Obviously, structures have to be figured out and all that, but much of that really has to happen post decision. It's almost impossible to decide all of those tiny details, because one of the conversations I remember coming up was around the regional structure. They had one regional structure and we had another regional structure in terms of states. And it was like, well, which region, how are we going to have regions? And, important questions, but probably way too premature with the absence of any decision being made.
Yeah.
That's really helpful, largely because you're describing one of the differences that we have made in the way that we've tried to move this forward at this point. Really, the vote that the members will be asked to make is on the concept of merger. Should we merge? And then lots of those details are left then to the founding board and to ongoing conversations with membership as it moves forward. So it is, do we believe this should happen? And then if it should happen, let's figure out the rest of it once we get together. Somebody described it in a conversation I was having last week, like a marriage, that you're committing to the marriage. You're not committing to where you're going to keep the soap dish or who gets a toothbrush on which side of the sink. We're not there yet. What do you think some of the opportunities are that we missed previously? You talked a little bit about how ACPE's mission has been bigger than just chaplaincy. Are there things that we may have missed because we didn't do this at an earlier date?
Well, I think during the time that I was most active as executive director, I think culturally, we were becoming a less and less religious nation. People seeing church and church affiliation of less importance than of generations past. And I think the impact of that kind of filtered down into our organization and its visibility in the larger culture. I remember during the crises around healthcare financing, how many of our healthcare programs were really threatened because they were seen as non-essential. And many of them were downsized because, people just didn't see the importance of having a chaplain or a paid chaplain, and certainly a CPE program that was taking resources rather than bringing resources to the institution. So it may have been, this is all speculative, it may have been that if we had become a larger presence in the culture, we may have been able to prevent some of that erosion if we had multiplied our forces
Mhm.
as two separate entities coming together for that one purpose, to keep the prominence of attending to people's faith needs at the forefront.
That's really helpful. Bill, your thoughts on that one?
Well, I certainly resonate with what Teresa's saying, and I do recall some conversations around that. What would it mean to have some kind of viable lobbying effort going on behalf of kind of the larger organizational stuff? One loss I think that I'm hoping that this new process will begin to address is that although it's not all about what we were about, I thought we had an opportunity, particularly with APC, to align our standards and outcomes for CPE programs, particularly level 1 and 2, with what APC was actually looking for when they were certifying chaplains. And I sat on enough APC committees, certification committees, to see that it just seemed like there was, more often than not, just some disconnect between what they had gotten, what had been focused on, as opposed to what they were then being asked to speak to in the committee meetings. So not wanting to make it all about that, because as Teresa said earlier, we have a much larger educational mission. It's simply that. But it did seem to me that APC was one of our biggest consumers, in the sense of they want to make use of what we're offering so that their people can be certified. So I think that was a lost opportunity, or at least a deferred opportunity. And I don't know what's happened with all of that. I know we've done the ethics thing, but we have the common standards, which are sort of in effect, but I don't know how thoroughly they're in effect. And I still don't know how ACPE centers are being held accountable to make sure that the students are being introduced to them and become acquainted with and can speak to them as they seek certification.
Yeah, I think that's
And to some extent, what I was going to say, to some extent, I think not doing that created a pathway in ministry for many of our consumers, because they just get totally confused. ACPE, APC, what's the difference? Who's that? And you know, for many of them, it just felt too complicated to figure out. And so we probably also missed out on a lot of people who had a lot of great potential for this, for pastoral care ministry, who just found the system too hard to navigate, too complicated, too many different expectations and committees and rules and process.
You're trying to blend a PC and a Mac sort of system thing, and it's just not quite communicating.
It's funny. I'm a living example of that. That after I'd completed 8 units, I went overseas for a year with my wife, and when we came back, I began looking how I might become board certified, and that's around the time of the College of Chaplains and Mental Health Chaplains coming together, and I couldn't find my way in. I had 8 units as well, and I wanted to explore the possibility of CPE education, and I couldn't find my way in. So it was that same, this is all very early internet. So we're in a different space now to some degree, but one of the things that the organizing committee has talked about in working on this has been something that provides so much clarity that when a student enters this, they can be a part of the same association all the way through, whether they go into congregational ministry, whether they want to become a chaplain board certified, whether they want to become an educator, whether they want to become a psychotherapist, a spiritually integrated psychotherapist, or if they're just interested in the action reflection model, they could also come into this, but that there would be a sort of pipeline that we could help people find their way through and navigate in a coordinated effort, where right now it feels like we're passing people back and forth and having to make sure they figure out all of our acronym world.
Yeah.
And the thing that people like us who have figured our way and have made it through the systems. The thing we have to remember is it's familiar to us, but it's totally foreign. I'm a mentor for a pastoral care group in a DMin program. And, all of them are seminary graduates, and many of them are, as much as they've been exposed and many of them have had CPE, I still have to kind of go back to square one, even with them, to explain, what ACPE is and what it does in APC. So we have to really remember to look at it through the eyes of the consumer who really has no awareness of these processes. And I think that's one of the dangers. Once you get kind of seeped in an organization, you think it's simple because you understand it. But to the newcomer, it can be just so daunting and overwhelming. I mean, I have some of my DMin students who are just top quality scholars and practitioners in ministry, but they just get overwhelmed.
I believe it. Yeah.
And part of, I think, what has become overwhelming as well is the competitive environment has changed quite a bit over time. And I'm curious if there are other conditions that are out there this time around that would encourage us towards a more successful effort, or whether it feels like we've just got a whole new set of issues that we're going to have to resolve. But I'm aware in the last 2 years, I know of 4 new organizations that are now offering CPE. And most of the time, it's an individual that starts a new program and they hang up a shingle and they name it in a way that it sounds really much larger than it might be. It may just be a couple of folks doing it, but students don't know when they're coming in what kind of program they're getting. They don't know how to ask the right questions about all of that. I'm curious in terms of this competitive environment, just in terms of the conditions on the ground for folks. What are the things that you would hope we'd be paying attention to if we're really going to do this well?
I think relationships to seminaries and denominations is absolutely critical. If the seminaries don't understand what's available, they can't direct students who have questions or who have interest. And if denominations don't see us as partners in ministry, I know in my jurisdiction, I have a serious shortage of pastors. But I also know that some people who think they should be pastors really would be better chaplains. And, because I know a lot about, that the world of ACPE, and I can say that, but if others in other denominations don't have an awareness. So that's one of the benefits, I think, of being a larger organization, if you're organized well around telling your story to the people who need to know your story so that they can access it. And so I think this need to make sure that our seminary partners, and not just the traditional ones, but even some of the non-traditional partners in denominations, really need to be a part of whatever initiatives go along with whatever happens, merger or merger.
And I would say, I have no idea. Of course, we haven't been meeting for a while. And I don't know what this current status of we used to always have, we had the seminary reps and the denominational reps, and they'd come, some of them would come to our meetings and all. But I'm really would envision something much more robust. Just some regular outreach, site visits with the seminaries or with denominations. That could be pretty overwhelming, but something more intentional about connecting with, communicating with these folks and updating them on what we're doing and what the implications are for some of the other stuff that's going on out there. And so not just relying on our annual meeting time to kind of try to get the message across.
And George Fischette and Wendy Cadge and I did a study a couple of years ago where we were looking at what's going on in seminary education related to spiritual care and chaplaincy. And we found in 1990, Nazarene Theological Seminary was the only school that was offering any courses or any kind of track in chaplaincy specifically. So by the time we got to 2017, we'd identified over 86 schools, both in the US and Canada, that were offering programs. And today it's over 100. At the same time, And Teresa, you remember when we were doing a lot of things for the Society of Pastoral Theology at ACPE, helping organize meetings, helping with their journal. Most of that they do on their own now, but in 2005, they had 320 members, which were mostly the pastoral care professors from seminaries and divinity schools. Today, they've got just over 100 members. And a large part of that is because as people have retired, schools have not filled those positions. So now a lot of spiritual care is being taught by adjuncts, if it's being taught at all, because ATS also dropped the requirement for spiritual care as a part of an MDiv degree. So a lot of our educators now are the principal educators of folks who are doing this work, which really changes the dynamic quite a bit as well. So you've got all these different forces that are at play. I think that those relationships with those schools, you're exactly right, are more vital than they've ever been. And as they are trying to figure out, we compared the curricula in these different schools just to kind of see if there were general themes, and it's the Wild West out there. It is just an interesting hodgepodge of what people are including and what they think they need to be teaching to equip people for this kind of work in the long haul.
Well, and that really does speak to, I think, a growing awareness that the seminary education has to match the needs of that the pastors in particular, or pastoral leaders, will experience in real time in the real world. I mean, we're having those serious conversations at the Interdenominational Theological Center, which, as you may know, consists of 5 different denominations. And we're really talking about, what does a curriculum look like for a denomination that has predominantly rural congregations, as opposed to a denomination that has predominantly urban congregations? What does it look like in terms of those who have serious investment in international work, and more than half of their membership are not U.S. people, So we're having those conversations, and I think what a lot of seminaries are really doing is trying to figure out how to send people out of seminary with some actual skills and a skill set that they can actually use. And that's where I think spiritual care has a prime opportunity, because those of us who are spiritual care providers know spiritual care is the one thing that just does not go away. People keep having spiritual care needs.
The other thing that occurs to me, and it goes back to something you were talking a little bit earlier, Trace, is more and more international folks are looking to us, the US, our kinds of programs, to provide the training that they want to have, that they think they need. And both in terms of coming here to get it, but also helping them figure out how to begin to set it up for their own. So to have a coherent collaboration between us and APC that can help them see clearly how both the educational and the certification stuff work together, and what will be made available to them when they get here, what the clearer pathway will be for them, I think would be really important, because they're hungry to come and get what we got.
I think that's helpful. The other thing that comes to mind for me is this an awareness of sustainable congregational positions, that there are a lot of places out there that need pastors, but a lot of pastors that aren't willing to work for what people are able to pay. And one of the things we've talked about is, could we be more intentional in trying to equip people to be a chaplain in the community while they're also serving a church? Because it may be 2 half-time jobs, more of the kind of portfolio ministry that we're hearing other people talk about. I know a lot of folks talk about it as bivocational. I don't think that's accurate. I think it's bi-occupational. It's one vocation. You're called to serve. And you're called to serve from a faith tradition, but you're just going to be doing that in different contexts. And how can we find ways to support people to explore that, so that especially some of those rural and urban communities that don't have the funds to pay for somebody full time, but if somebody was serving as a hospital chaplain or National Guard chaplain, or maybe at a local prison, and they're also working in a congregation, I think their impact is also greater than it would be if they were only serving one or the other. So it'll be,
In the Diocese of Southern Ohio, we are telling, I'm on the Commission on Ministry, and we are telling all the people who come into it, what we call explore the possibility of vocation, you should not expect that when you get done with all of this, that there's going to be a traditional full-time parish position waiting for you that you can then devote your life to. And so we talk a lot about tent making ministry, to actually use a really old term. Yeah, we don't like bivocational either. And so I think if we could point to something like this and say, by the way, here are some pathways and here's some programs that are set up to help you figure that out, or to achieve, you get the training and the education you need to do it, that could be really helpful, rather than just saying, this is what's coming down, figure it out and be ready.
Yeah, it sounds like this would, if we're able to figure this out, this would be one of the signs of success we could look back to 10, 15 years out. I'm curious if there are other signs of success that you all, if you were going to look back 10 years from now, we've done this well.
The first thing that comes to my
Say
mind,
that last part again.
If you were
What
looking
was
back,
that, Trace? I didn't.
if you were looking back 10 to 15 years from now, at this moment and this merger process, how would you know that we had done things well?
Well, I think the fact that both organizations are still standing and standing with strength is one of those testimonials. In a environment where, you know, organizations fold on a regular basis, the fact that ACPE and APC to maintain. I know here in I serve Alabama and Florida. I see the impact of the organizations. I was just, as you all were talking, I was trying to count. I have about 200 pastors, a little more, give or take. And I can on my hands count around 20 of them that are, what did you say, bi-occupational? They're hospital chaplains, part-time hospice chaplains, police chaplains, military chaplains. So we're having an impact. These organizations are really having an impact by equipping people for these kinds of ministries in an environment where you do have to kind of be creative and combine jobs. I think that continuing, or kind of the signs of hope, are the way in which communities kind of embrace spiritual care. Since I've been here in Birmingham, I have done 3 classes of training police chaplains and community chaplains. And this was at the request of the governments under which those chaplains were operating. And, you know, they heard from somebody who told them that somebody that I had done CPE, you know, it's kind of like word of mouth. But I think the organization's value is still there. The value of what we do is understood and seen. The funding of it may be challenging, but the ultimate appreciation for the fact that people need to know how to do what we do as educators, and people need to know how to do what we do as practitioners. It's enduring. It's still there. It's a part of our culture and our environment.
I would be remiss to not name that while we're recording this, the trial for Derek Chauvin and the death of George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd, is happening as we speak. And the thought of you working with folks to train them to be police chaplains just feels like right there on the cutting edge of things that we've talked about for a long time, but have not been able to find ways to really get done and to bring CPE into those kinds of contexts. So that sounds really important.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I'm coming at that question from a slightly different perspective. I'm so aware the history of ACPE is the constant struggle between the states' rights and the Federalists, that kind of thing, which it still goes on. I mean, it was really interesting to me to, was looking over the archives and coming across some letters between Chuck Hall and some of the regional directors, and he had this whole vision that he was going to bring them in and they were going to meet together regularly. And they said, no, we're not doing that. That's too much of central control of ACP of our programs and our region. So that's back in 1967 or 68, and here we are. And I still hear some of those echoes as I'm watching people respond to the news about that. And so I think I would like to look back in 10 or 15 years and see that as an organization, and whatever that organization is, that we have, that we maybe can stop fighting that battle and embrace the larger good of what we're doing, recognizing that new times call for and new challenges call for new models, and that we can embrace that and find our place in it. And I don't have a, it's not real concrete, but it's a strong feeling within me about what would growth look like for us to be able to get at least close to that kind of place. Because it sure did, up until recently, at least, I think it continues just to hamper, Teresa knows this better than I do, continue to hamper our functioning as an organization from time to time. You know, and the board would come up with some action and the regions would go, no, we're sorry, we're not doing that. And it was very frustrating.
Yeah, I agree, Bill. I would speak to that as, you know, how do we move to a both and approach rather than either or? Bill, I don't know, I can't remember who was president, but I know my very first regional directors consultation, the regional directors were meeting in San Diego, and I took it upon myself as executive director to put together the agenda
Oh,
for
did
that
you?
meeting. And when the meeting commenced, I was quickly told that was not my responsibility. And I was kind of like, okay, help me understand how this works. I do think that, as you said, Bill, as we exist now in 2021, and what that's going to look like 10 years from now, requires some sort of centralization. No enduring organization has been able to function in silos. And we're seeing that even in our denominations. Some of our departments have been functioning, you know, in silos, this one doing its own thing and this one doing its own thing. And in our denomination, we've been working together now more than a year. I think we're into our second year, trying to bring all of the players to the table, because there are just some things that we have to decide together and we have to commit to do together. That does not mean that you can't have some measure of autonomy to do your special thing. But this may be really the moment where APC and ACPE and, you know, APC has already kind of taken that move, perhaps out of some other motivation. But when we come together and put our forces together and stop competing and create a coherent process, we can still be our specialists in our respective areas of spiritual care. But there are just some things that we're going to get done better together. And, you know, 10 years from now, I hope to be able to look back and see that we moved from the competitive either or to a both and reality, where we're both working together and also honoring our specialties, our differences, and our diversities.
I'm sobered by the reality of how long it took the disparate bodies to all finally come together and form ACPE. It took them a good long while to work through all of their differences, and they were doing the same thing. So I just I have a lot of respect for the resistance, but I'm hoping that we're going to be moving in a more positive direction.
I'm grateful.
Well, maybe it's like that. maybe it's like that saying I've once heard, fear is to be noticed but not obeyed. Maybe that's the
Yeah.
same with resistance. We need to notice it, but we don't need to obey it. We need to learn from the resistance, but not let it shut down what could
I
be a
like
very
that.
good thing. A
Put
good
that on the
thing for
wall,
our field.
Trace. In the office.
I think we found a new tagline.
There we go. I like it.
I want to say thank you to both of you for your time, for your willingness to have this conversation. I am hopeful that we will be guided in wisdom as we make our way. Just to remind folks that the vote will actually take place in July, and between now and then, we will have a series of open Q&As. Please see the registration about those. It just went out today. And we will also have 3 town halls, the third of which we'll actually do jointly with APC. So
Cool.
grateful for both of you and your service. Thank you so much. And we'll have another video out next week to keep the conversation going. Thanks.
All
so
right. Thanks. Appreciate
Thank you,
it.
Trace, for your leadership.
Yeah.
Bill, great to see you.
Great to see you, Teresa. Hope to see you again in person sometime.
Soon and very soon, I hope.
Soon and very soon.
Very
Yeah.
soon.
All right.
Thanks,
Bye,
guys.
everybody.